Happy Hour, a place where new family historians can learn to document their family histories and celebrate their new discoveries. I'm Amy.
And I'm Penny, and we're here to help you discover your family tree from the beginning. Welcome to episode 36. So today's episode is a little different than our usual. Well, I said that last episode too, but that was definitely different. But this is even more different. So this episode, we are excited to have a guest on our podcast. And today's guest is Kenyatta D. Berry. And you all might know Kenyatta from the Genealogy Roadshow. She is one of the co-hosts there. And she has a new book out, The Family Tree Toolkit, which is a fantastic resource for beginner and really all genealogists. It has a lot of information in it, and we're going to talk to her about that today. Kenyatta's love of genealogy and her passions and her expertise lie in African American genealogy and slave ancestral research and in DNA. And she is very knowledgeable in all fields of genealogy as a whole. So we are really excited to have her as a guest.
But first,
we
we must get to our wine because we have priorities.
That's right. What is our wine
We love
today?
genealogy, but we also love our wine. So today we are featuring, this is actually a wine that one of my colleagues at work recommended. She's also a genealogist, so I figure,
she knows what she's talking about.
Exactly, she knows what she's talking about. So this is one that she goes to after hard days researching. Mm-hmm. It is a Pinot Noir from Oregon.
Okay.
So I love the Pinots from Oregon, Washington. This is from Willamette Valley. It's called Cloudline. And it's readily available, nicely priced. It's by Dreyfus Ashbury, and it is a very ruby red, deep cherry and berry notes with a really nice finish.
Good.
So there's a red. We don't do reds very often, but this one is really nice.
But that was a good one. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk to Kenyatta now.
Well, welcome to our podcast, Kenyatta. We're so happy to have you here, and we are excited to hear all about your new book, The Family Tree Toolkit.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about it. It's my first book, a labor of love.
Congratulations. And
Thank you.
Your genealogy, you are in this book.
Yes.
You have used your own experiences throughout the entire book, which is great. Because that's something that our listeners have always wanted is, we understand, you tell them this is what you need to do, but showing them through example, it really is a nice resource.
And I think that was important for me because it is sort of when you're writing a book like this, a how-to book, you don't want it to just be go do step by step by step by step. You want to kind of make it personal. And I wish I'd had something like this when I started 20 years ago to help guide me through the process because you both know doing genealogy can be overwhelming when you're starting.
Absolutely, yes. So how is your book different than like The Source or the Red Book?
Right. Both books I used. And probably I think I kind of say in my book. My book is different because it really is a how-to book for beginners. It's for people that say, I've done my DNA. Now I have more questions. Or, I have heard this family story. Where do I go? How do I start? I really wanted this to be a resource for folks who had no idea where to go or what to do. And it's different from, like, The Source or the Red Book because I think those books are kind of written in a very traditional, if I would say, genealogy style. Whereas The Source kind of says, okay, you're looking for, Native American records, or you're looking for Jewish records, or this is how you do Jewish research, right? That's something you go to for that. But it's very matter of fact. I own it, I used it, right? In the Red Book, which I don't have, but what I call is more around resources by state.
Correct,
right? So I do that.
You do.
But the thing that the chart that nearly killed me was the vital records chart that I did by state, right? Of marriage, birth, death, and divorce.
Yes.
I thought that was extremely important to show people the restrictions as well as
Yes.
the online resources.
Yes.
So, and the book is written in a very kind of easygoing style,
It is.
as opposed to very formal. I think.
Right.
I agree, and I love those sections that are done by state. So it's easy to go in and say, okay, I can find what vital records are, and then you have the one on military
Yeah, Confederate pension.
by state as well, which is great.
Yes.
Yeah, so I love that.
Yeah, those, I think my biggest chapters are definitely immigration and naturalization and then the military records. And a lot of the time, I went through, when I was writing this book, it was very fascinating because I kind of wanted to incorporate history because that's a big part of genealogy.
Right.
And I think that's not saying that they don't do that in like the source, but I feel like incorporate it in a way where it's unique little pieces and nuggets that people didn't know about.
Yes.
And telling stories from Genealogy Roadshow
Yes.
as well. And then for the military, I thought this is, people don't talk a lot, some people talk about Confederate pensions, but it's not something that like the average person really knows where to get those records.
Right.
So I thought it was extremely important. And I just wanted to make it just very user friendly. And I think the publisher did a fantastic job as far as the cover and layout and everything. So I'm very happy with that.
I agree. I think it's very easy flow, very easy reading and understanding and everything. And you also have a lot of little tips
Yes.
located throughout there, which
Yes.
are great.
Yeah. Nice little boxes. You can just just focus right in on that.
Yes.
And, and they're all really right on tips. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was kind of interesting in writing the book that, as a professional genealogist and knowing other genealogists, I was sort of like, for a while, I was like, oh my God, someone that knows, C files is going to know, say, I didn't enter this thing, or this date wasn't correct. You kind of, I think when you're writing a book, you critique yourself as you go through and edit.
Yeah.
Right.
And finally, at some point, I said, you know what? This book isn't written for, it's great for professional genealogists, but this book is written for the broader audience. And that's why the publisher came to me to write it. Because they wanted a book for everybody.
Right.
Absolutely.
Somebody not going into professional.
Right.
Yes.
And you know, when you were saying, you might have missed something or you didn't get it right. We all do that in our personal genealogy.
Exactly.
Because somebody says to me, you need to print off, do a little booklet. I'm like, oh no, because I could be wrong somewhere, or I don't have it all done.
Right.
So I'm not printing it off.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And depending on when you started, I was telling someone the other day, when I started 20 years ago, I look at my first tree on Ancestry and just... so I look at that and thinking, okay, I feel like I need to just start over, right?
Yeah.
With all that I know. But that's one of the things when I talk about cite your sources and everything in here is I don't want people to make the same mistakes that I made.
Yes, and I'm glad I did see that little tip in there. Cite your sources. I was like, yes, because Penny and I are always preaching that.
Yeah.
And obviously, you've got Elizabeth Shown Mills books to you can reference, but cite those sources because you spend so much time going back and trying to figure out where you got that information from. If you just take a few more minutes, it's the time consuming. Nobody likes doing it. You know, I hate doing the footnotes. But it's worth it in the end. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
And I think the other thing, talking about Elizabeth Shown Mills, right? The three of us know her, right? But if we talk to the person who is just starting a family history, they have no idea.
Right, that's true.
They have no, right. So that's why it's important even, reference her in the book and her book as well. But it's like, I think that's important. That was important to me is that I found in genealogy, books are written, they're very siloed, a lot of them. I mean, there's someone that are beginning, but they've been written a long time ago.
Right.
So how do you kind of bring it up to date and then deal with all the changes we've seen in genealogy over the past years? So I was hoping to kind of accomplish that.
I was going to say, yes, bringing in all those internet sources, and because that's where everyone's going now.
Yes, they are.
Penny and I, we took a road trip last spring, to do the on-site research, which is fun because you get to roll up your sleeves, you get into the dusty, moldy books. Yeah, it's great, it's exciting, but most of our genealogy, it starts on the internet.
It does.
And right, so and a lot of those resources, those older books, that they have been updating them, but still,
it takes some time.
It does, So that's good.
When did you decide you were going to do this book?
So that's the interesting thing. So I get an email on my website from kenyattaberry.com, and it's like this guy from Skyhorse, and he says, I want you to write a book. And I was like,
Okay. Oh, wow.
I was like, this is interesting. So I remember I was probably doing some trip or something. I was in Alexandria, Virginia, and I used to live in Virginia, so I always stay in Old Town. And I was at the hotel, and I remember kind of talking to him, and I was like, are you really sure you want to publish this book? I mean, have you did the market research? It's kind of funny for me to say that to him.
Right.
Yeah. I was like, okay. And he says, well, you know, I wanted to be, like, it was a toolkit. So I want you to write a toolkit.
Yeah.
And the only thing he gave me was, as an example, was the NARA toolkit. And so the National Archives.
Oh, sure.
That toolkit they have around federal records and all the stuff they have there. And he said, something like this. And that was that.
Here you go.
Here you go. And
Wow.
I was just like, oh, okay. So I spent a lot of time kind of, you know, I don't have a lot of stuff on my wall, so I have those big Post-its, and I just did it by, like, all the different records, the different chapters.
Sure. Okay.
I started doing, I was going to Santa Monica Library, getting, like, John P. Coletta's books. I'm getting, like, everything I can to kind of understand, you know, for areas that I don't know as much about.
Right.
And it was interesting because I read the book while I was working full-time in software sales.
Wow.
So I had to sell, like, multi-million-dollar worth of software, and I was writing the book. So it was a challenge, but it definitely paid off.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. And I found out when I went to a writers conference, because I had a contract, but not a literary agent. So I had to find an agent, but I just handed her a contract. So it was like
A little backwards, right?
Yeah. And I found out when I went to a writers conference in Pasadena. So they had us, everyone's talking and whatever else, and then they had us in this bridge. They said, walk across the bridge, you have an agent. And let's say there's like 25 people there, right? It's only me and one other person that had an agent. So all of these writers, because it's so hard to apparently get an agent, right? So all these writers came up to me and said, well, how did you get your agent? And I just didn't even want to tell them the experience, because I'm like, they've probably been writing for 10 years, and here I am.
Right.
Right. First book.
First book.
Yeah.
And I show up. So, but it was, I mean, it was a great
Interesting.
experience. Yeah.
Wow. So what did you learn? You mentioned that you know, you had to write about in areas in genealogy that you were not expert in. I mean, we all have those areas where we feel very comfortable, and in others that we don't.
We kind of stay away from DNA.
Yeah, well, we do. That's for sure. So what did you learn?
So there's a couple of things. One of the key factors that I learned is that in writing the book, I didn't know a lot about Native American research. I knew enough. I knew a little bit about European, nothing about Jewish ancestry.
Sure.
And then I kind of figured, but for African American research, you have to know European and African American.
Right.
So it was kind of interesting for me to do everything because I didn't shy away from something if I didn't know it. That's why I got all the resources together to try to figure it out. And I wasn't afraid to, well, I was for a little bit afraid to write about something I didn't know anything about, but then I also thought the average person's not going to know that I don't know this in depth. So I'm just giving them enough to get started, and so that's what I
Right.
did.
You're not saying I'm an expert in this.
No.
You're saying this is where you need to start, because this is where I would start.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because people who are using this book, too, are just getting started. So, they don't need the in-depth. If you're going to do German research, you're going to get books on German research.
Right.
Right.
You're not,
Yeah.
right.
You start here, and then you start building. And
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I use actually, I provide a lot of resources for that, right? And what I chose, what was interesting in the European section, I chose, I think I did, I can't remember, but Italian, I did, I think I did a little bit of German, and then, the Irish,
right.
English, Welsh, Scotland and Wales. And I chose those because I kind of looked at the numbers and statistics from the Census Bureau of what people claim as their heritage.
Sure.
And I thought, I can't do it all, right? Or this would never get done. Right. Let me take the top 4, most common, get them started on that, and then you dig a little bit deeper. Right. So that was sort of the logic behind that section.
Okay.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I know the section in the very back. I love that you've just got the lists back there.
Yeah.
After adoption. Well, you've got even a section on adoption, too.
On adoption,
which is
yeah.
great.
Which is one of the things that I did with the book as well is for the adoption section. So I actually had a couple of genealogists that I know review the book before I turned it in. So I had a woman who was adopted review the adoption. I have no knowledge of that, right? I had to review that section. And then I also had a friend of mine review the immigration naturalization and someone else to review military. Because I just wanted to make sure I was sort of on the, heading in the right direction, which is kind of unusual, especially when you're doing like a genealogy book.
Nice.
That typically happens in like academic settings.
Exactly, right. Good. Very good. Good for you. I like how you showed you showed your own DNA.
Yes.
But then you showed how different companies will present your results. So that was really interesting too, because it's important to look at both.
It is. And what's interesting about that, and I told someone this today, is the DNA that I have in there for Ancestry. Yeah. They changed their algorithm. And,
they did. Yeah.
And so the way they changed it, it's like I don't know, 44% Ivory Coast Ghana, and like that's dropped significantly,
right? Yeah,
because they changed it. So that, and when I started writing the book, I think Ancestry had only sold like 3 million kits.
Oh, okay.
And by the time it was published, it was like 10, and I don't know what it is today. But it's interesting how DNA has exploded, and a lot of questions that I get. Is around DNA and privacy. And so when I was on the show this morning, daytime, one of the hosts had actually tested it, and the other one hadn't tested it. And she said her main concern was privacy and what they do with your data. And my first DNA test, and I put it in the book, was actually with Family Tree DNA.
Right.
And I did their mtDNA test in about 2009. And they are... I have gone through their lab because we did a little segment for Genealogy Roadshow, but it didn't air. But I went to Houston and saw everything. Yeah. But they've come out and said they're not necessarily, they don't sell your data. They don't sell it to companies, and it's because they're the only one that has their lab, it stays with them. And I think that we've seen this concern about privacy because of all of those cold cases.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it does.
Which are fascinating.
They're fascinating. Yeah. But it's that old gen match. I mean, it's the genealogists who are like, we just love this tool. Let's upload, whatever. And the next thing you know, there's multiple people. They're using it in law enforcement.
Yeah. Right.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. That's the one thing that I come across is people who are like hesitant because of the privacy issues. And, but I've tested in my boys on the Y-DNA and family tree DNA. Yeah. I have one son who's adopted and one who is biological. And my adopted son, his paternal grandfather was adopted. So I knew the family, and then I went like, oh, wait a minute, he's adopted too? Now what do I do? Right. But there was a name in the family that came up, and so when I tested his Y-DNA, that name was right there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah, it was really neat. Yeah.
And that's what I tell people. I did this other show, and we were talking about privacy. She said, well, if everyone's so concerned, what's the advantage of DNA? And I said adoption. That's the first, just sharing that story. I think it's great.
Right.
And I think we are I think of DNA as sort of like the Wild West of where we were, 10 years ago, right? Because we're in the cusp of this wave. I don't know what's going to be on the other side of it, but I really think we're going to see some changes that occur.
I like that description of that. That's that's a good
absolutely.
visual.
Well, I think 100 years from now, our society is changing in ways where we don't see couples getting legally married. So there aren't going to be those marriage records that we're going to be able to rely on. So there's going to be a lot. The documentation is going to be much different 100 years from now, and the DNA may be that's where it's at. So we have to.
That's very true.
The other thing that the Y-DNA did for my biological son was I put him into a study group, and they were able to sort out every man who was in that group and into different categories, and then that helps me then identify where that this particular DNA settled in this part of North Carolina. So now I can go to that county and start looking, rather than the entire state of North Carolina. So that was very interesting.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So, but that's something that I need to continue to learn about. So, but
it seems like so far you've got some good experience in the stories at least.
Absolutely, no, it's worked out really well. So yeah. So that's a really neat example that you have in the book. Yeah. So yours has changed since.
Has changed, yes. My ancestry has changed. I've tested a lot of my family, but most of my I talk a lot about my personal story in there, and my family from Virginia and upstate New York and Detroit. Tried to. It's interesting. I didn't get started doing my own family, right? I started doing my ex-boyfriend's family, which everyone finds fascinating. It was interesting because he was named after his second great grandfather, and so he had his middle name, which was Dwelle, and that was his surname. So Dwelle. That's an interesting surname. Yeah. Great place to start African American genealogy, right? Yeah. But the interesting thing with him was that he had, and I'm sure I mentioned George in the book, he was listed in one of those biographical sketches, right? And
that's what you said.
And so it was such a, having that kind of genealogical discovery your first time, getting to my family, I was like, they're not that great, or they're not that, they're just average. But then I've learned over the years, because I've reconnected with cousins, that we have a very, very fascinating story. And so because of my research, and because going back to upstate New York, I have a cousin in DC who's writing a book about sort of the women in our family in Central Virginia. And we're super connected to, so we're in Orange, Madison, and Culpeper counties. And those counties include Albemarle too, but they include Montpelier, Monticello, the Highlands, and like some other, like all the presidential stuff. All of that. And so I go there back there all the time. But it's always great to, as you talked about, reminded me going to the county, being able to go.
Dig through.
The other thing that you also bring up in here, I think, at the very beginning, is asking yourself questions when you're getting started, and that's really interviewing yourself. Because even I was surprised, because I think I know, you think you know, but I found out that my grandparents weren't married in the county where they were born, lived their entire lives, and died. They actually went to a different state. I think, Penny, you found out that you have grandparents who went to a different country to get married. Canada to get married. So I'm just, I make those assumptions, and I.
They don't keep those secrets.
So you have to interview yourself and then really take an inventory of what you think you know and what you actually have documented.
Well, and you know what else is so important about that is a lot of times we don't think our story is important. Right. So we're not writing it down. We're like, well, I know that, or who cares about my life?
Right.
And, even my mom, still to this day, I'll say, please write this stuff down. She's like, oh, I'll get to it. It's like,
you're like,
get
to it. And I think that is so true, that people don't think their own story is fascinating. But it is. And that's one of the things that I love about genealogy and about doing family history is there are a lot of people that our ancestors that came before us didn't think their stories were fascinating. Because here we are looking for them, looking for them 100, 150 years. And for my own family, when I look at my line, and I go back to my 5th great grandmother, Mildred Payne. When I look at Mildred, I'm like, okay, I want to know more about you. I want to know about you. I mean, you were enslaved. You died in 1880, but I want to know more about you. And then I know that your daughter lived over to be like 100, and then other people lived over to be like, I want to know all of this stuff about what your life was like. And I'm sure at that time they didn't think, oh, my story is important to someone.
Right. It is. Absolutely. Every family has wonderful stories that really need to be told. Yeah,
they do.
For sure. Now, African American genealogy, the challenges. Yes. I've actually done some of that in Virginia, and
all roads lead to Virginia.
All they do. But it was fascinating. But there's definitely some challenges. So you address those in the book as well.
Yes. It was funny in writing the book. I was so immersed in all the other things. Not that I wasn't immersed in African American, but because I've done it so much, I was sort of like, oh, these other things are so fascinating. But with African American genealogy, there are tons of challenges. The first myth that I would like for your listeners to understand is that the myth that records don't exist is not true. They do. It's just hard to find them.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's true.
I mean, that's very true. The second myth I address is not everyone's named after the person that enslaved them. They did not take their surname.
That's true. Yeah.
So unless it was an unusual surname like Dwelly or Simpkins or whatever, but if it's a Berry or Carter, you can't assume that. The challenges in doing African American genealogy is really trying to get to the last enslaver.
Right.
So once you find that person's name, the documentation is attached to them. So I call it a bonus family, but in African American genealogy, you have to. I know most people don't like that, but you have to literally do 2 trees.
Sure.
Yeah.
You do.
Right.
Yeah.
You do.
And so you have this additional family that you have to track to find your family.
Yeah.
Because the records are related.
Yep.
Or that's what the records will be. So those are the challenges. The other challenge which I talk about in the book, and I'm really big on studying. When I study slavery, I study it in a way as a scholar. Okay, so it's not just as a genealogist. The domestic slave trade was huge impact because almost 900,000 enslaved people were forcibly moved from Virginia into Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana during that time period, so the 1830s to 1860s, right? In that 30 years.
It's a huge number.
Huge number.
Yes.
Wow.
So what you have,
That's interesting.
that how do I find the folks, the families that were separated.
Right.
And so that becomes a real challenge because you don't have everyone staying in one place.
Yeah.
And then you also have families from Virginia after the Indian Removal Act and the West opened up. Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, moving to Mississippi in those areas. So what I try to do in my work is really help people understand the history and try to get those documents related to domestic slave trade and understand slave trading because in that way you can get to those names and be able to kind of understand that stuff. But for the average person just starting out doing African American research, it can be challenging. They get to 1870 brick wall.
Yep.
Reconstruction, which no one really talks about a lot, right? But that's when you have the Freedmen's Bureau.
Yes. And that's not the end all be all.
It's not the end all be all. I mean, but Reconstruction was chaos. I mean, Civil War was chaos, but Reconstruction was chaos. And so, how do you even find people? I've been to lectures, or there used to be newspaper ads where they put in information wanted. And there's people looking for their families.
Oh wow!
So they
trying to reconnect after.
Trying to reconnect.
Wow.
So there's resources like that. Like newspapers are really good for that type of stuff. If you see someone in 1870 and they're in Mississippi, look at the counties. Look for people that are let's say they're in Mississippi but they were born in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Look for the people in the county that were born in North Carolina around the same time.
They were all probably came together.
They could have. Or the other thing is during what's also fascinating, and I won't go too deep in this to show my history nerd. but what's also fascinating is after the Civil War, most of these big planters lost everything, right? Because their most valuable asset was their human capital, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So they lost all this stuff. So there's a ton of newspapers that have sales of their property. So, we're selling this former plantation by this person. If you can look at that and say, okay, well, I know my family in 1870 was in this location. I know this former plantation, which is now being sold, is in this location.
Yes.
Maybe or may not, that may or may not be the slavery, but it helps narrow it down because that's a big thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating. I work a lot with historians of slavery.
Okay.
A lot. I'm on the board of this whole thing with Cornell and UVA. I don't talk about it a lot because I like to do it in the background. But it's because of my own personal project. But it's really to kind of help people.
But there are so many African Americans out there who want to know more, and they're very curious. But it's a whole different. It's very different than doing.
It is
someone who has European history.
So it's very different, and it's also I find people come to me. Once they do their GMAT. So they say, I've done my DNA.
Okay.
So then what's next? African Americans. Or a lot of, I started to take clients once I, left my job and the book was published. And a lot of people come to me with very, very complex, kind of problems that they've been doing for 20 years. They've hit this brick wall. It's something that can be done. It takes patience, but it also takes, as you know, with anything, you have to understand the county, you have to understand the records within the county. And a big resource are universities. I mean,
so many. We've talked about that.
So many universities. I remember I'm working a lot at the University of Mississippi, which is great. And University of Mississippi, they invited me, I think February. I went there and they invited me to do, they have a group called Universities Studying Slavery. It's a bunch of universities. UVA, University of Virginia, started it. There's about 45, 50 that are involved. I've been in their conference, and it's all these historians of slavery. And University of Mississippi invited me in February to talk to their slavery study group, which consisted of like 50 people, historians, a Faulkner scholar. I mean, it was just it was a broad group. But one of the things they did is they went to special collections, and they said, okay, we want to show you some stuff. And I get chills thinking about it. They brought out this book. I mean, it wasn't even that big. It was a plantation record. And it had the names
oh my gosh
of these enslaved people on the different plantations. And I'm like, and it was like when I opened it, they were part of it. I felt like they were like, finally, someone's found me. And I thought, this book is hidden, but these people want to be found.
And it makes them real.
It makes them real. It was so, I was just like, you gotta digitize.
Digitize, right?
Yeah. What are you waiting for?
Yeah, but it's those types of records exist, but it's just navigating them to find them.
Absolutely, you're right. Yeah. You have to go beyond the courthouse, beyond the official state records.
Right.
So,
and then also I think, and I've said this on different, I think it was on another podcast, but it's just like, make friends, or not friends, but get to know the historians in the areas in which you're interested. I know there's been this stigma for years with genealogy, we're just hobbyists, they're academics, all of that. Let's get beyond that, because they study the most just like obscure stuff, and they have very detailed records. I mean, I had two historians show me, they one wrote a book on kind of the economics of slavery. So they have this money, and they go to New Orleans. If you go to Louisiana, Louisiana's a crazy state to research in. But they have great records. And they showed me all these notarial records from the notary, and it was literally every slave transaction.
Oh my goodness!
From this period of time, and I'm like, and I said, well, what are you going to do with this? He's like, well, I use it to write my book. I'm like, what? It's sitting on your laptop, like.
Wow.
Share, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's that's why I say
somebody's looking for those people in that book.
So
the other thing that you can do is look, like you said, look for those records. Look for those. I was reading a diary when I was in Virginia at the Library of Virginia, and it was a diary written during the Civil War, and it brings in those people that I saw their names in the deed book, and they're mentioned. They happen to be mentioned in this diary. So now you're getting that fuller story, and it may not be your actual descent or ancestor in that, but it gives you an idea of what they were was like, and where in the area that they were living at the time. So, it brings much more color into it.
It does. It does. And when I do research, it's interesting you mention that, because I'm such a nerd. I love dissertations, so I will read.
That's a little strange.
I know. So I will read a dissertation. It's funny because it gives you that historical context.
Absolutely,
I remember I was doing a project for a journalist, and I was trying to find some enslaved people that were moved from one county in Mississippi to another one, probably like in the early 1860s, and then moved to Texas in 1863.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a challenge. But one of the things that helped me was one of the men involved in the business deal, his wife had written a memoir. And so she was talking about, and they had plantations both in Louisiana and Mississippi. And so she was talking about the journey, and she mentioned some names, but it was just, it gave that historical context, and it's great to hear her point of view.
Right, exactly, Yeah.
Cool
good stuff.
Well, you're going to be at Roots Tech in February.
I am going to be at Roots Tech in February, and I will be giving a couple of lectures, presentations, I think they call them.
Good.
I am doing let's see, so I'm doing an extra panel.
Okay.
A couple of folks, and then I am actually talking about slave trading and slave speculation, at which I don't think that's ever happened.
Right.
And then I'm talking about also my father's side of the family, which is around oil and slave marriages. So what's interesting about that is multiple years ago, actually 20 years ago, my dad gave me this court case when I started law school. And he said, this is about our family. We had oil in Arkansas. And I was like, whatever, Dad, you're a conspiracy theorist. I didn't go to the show. I totally dismissed it. And so years later, I look at it, I go back to it, and I can't remember how, I think it's my third great grandmother. But on that side of the family, I'm really talking about kind of in East Texas and in Arkansas, there were a lot of African Americans who owned land, but that land had oil in it.
Okay.
And once the oil was discovered, there was a process, legal or illegal, to get that land back.
Ah.
So one of my ancestors died in about 1946.
Okay.
With 2 oil-producing wells on his property. He had no children, so his wife got automatic 50%. While his dad was formerly enslaved. Because he was formerly enslaved, slaves couldn't get married. So so they had to go through and find out who the descendants were. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a long court case that went to 1951, and it went to Arkansas Supreme Court, and basically they recognized slave marriage as jumping over the broom. Right. And I was from the Patsy line, so my ancestor Patsy is in this court case, and all of I think it was my great grandmother used to get penny checks, so to speak, from this whole court case that went out. So I'm talking about that and sort of how that happened in East Texas. And the last but not least, and this will be an interesting one to talk about because I've been doing this for a year. We'll see. And I live in Santa Monica, but it's called Jumping Off the Cliff to Pursue Your Dreams, and it's on the entrepreneurship track. And it'll really talk about my journey to leave a well-paying software job, being a single woman, no kids, to do genealogy full time.
Yeah,
right. We'll see what happens in 2019 on that one, but so that's what I'll be talking about.
Well, I think so far you've done pretty well with that.
Well, thank you.
So, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good.
And of course, you're still doing the Genealogy Roadshow. Is that still happening, or is that?
I like to take it in hiatus. It hasn't been canceled, but it hasn't been renewed. I think it's really a funding issue at this point.
Okay. Because that is such a fun show to watch.
Yeah, we love doing it.
Yeah. Love getting all the history out of that one.
Yeah, so we love doing it. So we would love to have it, find some money, and get it back going. Right. For sure.
Well, thank you for stopping by. It was wonderful to see you here in Tampa, and good luck to you. Good luck on the book. We're going to have a link to the book.
We will
on our website, so people can go there, and then they can just link it right to. It's on Amazon. And
it has I got the #1 bestseller pop up.
Yay! Congratulations!
That's awesome.
All right.
That is awesome.
All right. Well, very good. So it's nice meeting you, and thank you so much for being here.
And until next time.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Please email us with any questions or comments at genealogyhappyhour@gmail.com.
Visit our website, www.genealogyhappyhour.com, for additional resources, books, and wines. Don't forget to drink responsibly.
And never drink around genealogical documents.